Imagine a fighter jet that creates its own electronic ghosts. It renders billion-dollar American stealth radars useless in a heartbeat. It does not need a pristine airbase. It screams off a frozen highway in the dead of winter, rearmed by teenage conscripts in less time than it takes to finish your coffee. While the world was hypnotized by the geometric angles of the American F-35, a silent revolution was brewing in the high north. This is not just a story about a plane. This is the story of how a small Scandinavian nation built a machine designed to dismantle the air superiority of superpowers. Welcome to the strategic paradox of the Gripen E, the aircraft that challenged the mighty American military-industrial complex for the soul of the Canadian Air Force. For over half a century, the concept of North American air defense has been a monologue spoken by the United States. The logic in Washington was absolute. To defend the continent, one must buy American. This created a technological hegemony where the F-16, the F-18 Hornet, and eventually the F-35 Lightning II became the default currency of aerial warfare. The United States did not just sell hardware, it leased security. The assumption was that Canada, a nation with the second largest landmass on Earth and a founding member of NATO, would naturally fall in line, replacing its aging fleet of Hornets with the latest marvel from the American assembly lines. But the strategists in Stockholm saw a flaw in this assumption. They recognized that the American way of war relies on overwhelming logistics, massive infrastructure, and complete air dominance. These are luxuries that Canada, with its vast, empty Arctic frontiers, could not always guarantee. Enter the Gripen E, a fighter jet forged in the mindset of resistance. It was not built to project power across oceans like an American carrier-based jet. It was built for survival. It was designed for a singular, specific purpose. To fight an overwhelming enemy force from a broken, burning homeland where every major airbase has been destroyed. To understand why this aircraft posed such a lethal threat to the American narrative in Ottawa, we must look under the skin of the machine. The Gripen E operates on a philosophy of distributed lethality. While the F-35 is a flying supercomputer that demands climate-controlled hangars and specialized maintenance crews, the Gripen is a guerrilla fighter. Picture a remote stretch of highway in the Canadian Yukon. The temperature is minus 30 degrees Celsius. The wind is howling across the tundra. In a standard war game, a fifth-generation stealth fighter would be grounded, its sensitive stealth coatings at risk, its sensors blinded by ice, and its logistics chain severed by the distance. But in this scenario, a pair of Gripens descend from the gray clouds, touching down on a strip of asphalt no longer than 800 meters. This is the Swedish doctrine of road-based operations. Within moments of the wheels touching the tarmac, a small team of technicians swarms the aircraft. In Sweden, these are often 18-year-old conscripts using standard tools, not specialized proprietary equipment that requires a satellite link to a server in Texas. In 10 minutes, the aircraft is refueled. Fresh Meteor missiles are slung under the wings. The pilot runs a system check, and the single General Electric F414 engine roars back to life, kicking up a storm of snow. Before an enemy satellite can triangulate their position, they are airborne again. This capability fundamentally changes the calculus of Arctic warfare. If Canada were to adopt this platform, it would mean that an enemy could not simply bomb 5 or 6 known airbases to cripple the Air Force. Every highway, every rural road, and every remote outpost would become a potential launch pad. It turns the entire geography of Canada into a weapon. This offers a level of strategic depth that the stealthiest jet in the American inventory cannot offer, simply because the American jet is tethered to its heavy infrastructure. However, kinetic performance is only half of the equation. The true strategic nightmare of the Gripen E lies in the invisible war, the electromagnetic spectrum. The American philosophy of air combat for the last 30 years has been physical stealth. Shape the aircraft to deflect radar waves. Make it invisible. But physics is catching up. Low-frequency radars and infrared search and track systems are making physical stealth harder to maintain. Sweden took the road not taken. Instead of hiding, the Gripen screams. It utilizes an internal electronic warfare suite known as Arexis. This system does not just jam enemy radar, it manipulates it. Imagine an enemy pilot locking onto a Gripen. His radar confirms the target. He fires a missile. But the target was never there. The Arexis system had captured the incoming radar signal, modified it, and sent it back, creating a phantom image miles away from the actual aircraft. The Gripen E is designed to penetrate the most advanced anti-access area denial bubbles not by being invisible, but by being confusing. It creates a wall of digital noise, a hall of mirrors that blinds the adversary's sensors. For a nation like Canada, guarding the massive northern approach against potential incursions from the east, this electronic dominance offers a compelling alternative to physical stealth. It is cheaper, it is adaptable, and most importantly, it is upgradable. But being able to take off from a frozen road is useless if you cannot fire your own missiles. This brings us to the feature the Pentagon was terrified you would find out about, the concept of data sovereignty. This was the dagger pointed at the heart of the American deal. When a nation buys an F-35, they are buying a black box. The source code, the threat libraries, and the mission data files are strictly controlled by the manufacturer and the Pentagon. If Canada wanted to integrate a new, locally made missile or modify the radar to better track threats over the Arctic ice, they would have to ask Washington for permission, and likely pay millions for the privilege. Sweden flipped the table. They offered Canada the keys to the kingdom. Saab proposed a complete transfer of technology. They told the Canadians that they would not just fly the jets, they would own the digital soul of the aircraft. Ottawa would have full control over the mission data. They could write their own code. They could integrate their own weapons without waiting for a foreign power's approval. This offer of sovereignty in a box resonated deeply with strategists who feared that Canada was becoming nothing more than a vassal state of the American military machine. It exposed a vulnerability in the U.S. export strategy, the arrogance of control. Sweden argued that true security comes from independence, not reliance on a supply chain that stretches back to a factory in Fort Worth, Texas. By proposing to build the jets in Canada, to employ Canadian engineers, and to share the deepest secrets of the avionics, Sweden was engaging in a form of engineering diplomacy that the United States could not match without compromising its own security protocols. Let us run a hypothetical wargame scenario set in the year 2030 to see the tactical implications. Imagine tensions in the Arctic have boiled over. A flight of adversary bombers, escorted by heavy interceptors, approaches North American airspace. The U.S. Air Force is stretched thin, committed to a conflict in the Pacific. Canada stands alone on the northern front. If Canada were operating a small fleet of expensive stealth fighters, the commanders would be hesitant. Losing a single jet would be a national catastrophe, a loss of hundreds of millions of dollars and a critical asset. The fleet readiness rates might hover around 50 or 60% due to supply chain issues. But with the Gripen, the math changes. The operating cost is a fraction of the American alternative. Canada could afford to put more jets in the air. In this scenario, the dogfight is dead. The Canadian Gripens refuse to merge and turn. Instead, they utilize the Meteor Missile, a ramjet-powered nightmare with a no-escape zone 3 times larger than standard American ordnance. Watch the geometry. The Gripen pilot fires, then immediately cranks 90 degrees hard. Thanks to the swashplate-mounted Raven ES-05 radar, he is now flying perpendicular to the enemy, yet his radar remains locked on the target over his shoulder. He is guiding the missile while flying away from the return fire. Meanwhile, a second flight of Gripens is operating in digital silence. No radar. No emissions. They are ghosts, receiving targeting data via a secure link from the lead jet. They flank the enemy formation. The adversary's radar warning receivers are screaming with false contacts generated by the lead element's electronic warfare suite. They are fighting ghosts. Then, the silent flight unleashes a barrage of missiles from the darkness. By the time the enemy realizes what is happening, it is too late. The adversary is dismantled not by superior brute force, but by superior information architecture and tactical flexibility. This is the vision that shook the Pentagon. It was not just about losing a sale, it was about losing the narrative. If Canada, the closest neighbor and ally of the United States, proved that a European single-engine fighter could provide better sovereignty and strategic value than the American flagship program, the dominoes would start to fall. Other nations, like Brazil or India, would look at the Canadian model and realize they had a choice. The Swedish counteroffer highlighted that in the modern era, lethality is not just about airframe size or thrust-to-weight ratios. It is about software speed. The Gripen E separates its flight-critical systems from its tactical systems. This sounds like a minor technical detail, but it is revolutionary. It means you can update the radar software, the weapons algorithms, and the map data as easily as updating an app on a smartphone, without needing to recertify the flight safety of the entire plane. The American alternative requires months, sometimes years, of testing for major software block upgrades. In a war where algorithms evolve weekly, the ability to update code in hours is a weapon in itself. Furthermore, the implicit hypothesis of the Swedish bid challenged the definition of alliance. The United States demanded interoperability through uniformity. Their message was, buy our gear, and we can talk. Sweden offered interoperability through open standards. They argued that a Canadian Gripen could talk to an American F-35, share data, and fight alongside it, without Canada having to submit to American industrial dominance. It was a vision of NATO as a partnership of equals, rather than a hub-and-spoke system centered on the Pentagon. Washington mobilized its entire diplomatic machinery to counter this narrative. The pressure applied on Ottawa was immense. The arguments shifted from performance to politics. The concept of NORAD unity was leveraged as the ultimate trump card. But the very fact that the contest was this close, that a small Swedish firm could force the world's sole superpower to fight tooth and nail for a contract in its own backyard, proved the validity of the Gripen concept. The Gripen E stands as a testament to the idea that bigger is not always better, and that stealth is not the only path to survival. It represents the road not taken for Western air power, a path of high readiness, dispersal, electronic deception, and national independence. Whether or not the maple leaf ever adorns the wings of these Swedish jets, the strategic argument has been made. The monopoly is broken. The idea that a nation can defend its skies with agility and intellect, rather than just raw expenditure, is now a permanent part of the global defense conversation. As we look to the future of aerial warfare, we must ask ourselves a critical question. Is the future a massive, integrated system that is too big to fail, or is it a swarm of adaptable, resilient predators that can fight from anywhere? Sweden bet on the latter, and in doing so, they rewrote the rulebook on what an air force can be. If you enjoyed this analysis of the hardware shaping the future of combat, make sure to subscribe to AirDom. And I want to hear from you in the comments. In a full-scale Arctic conflict, would you rather be in the cockpit of a stealth F-35, or the electronic warfare Gripen E? Let the debate begin.